Hello everyone and welcome back to another Retro Tech Detective video. Today we are taking a look at this unassuming, uninspiring grey tower which is home to a Dell Dimension 2400. Or is it? When I was asked if I wanted this tower sight unseen otherwise it was going in the trash, I quickly accepted and fully expected to find a motherboard that was rendered useless by the now infamous capacitor plague of the early 2000s. But before we open up this lump, let's take a moment to admire the absolutely underwhelming design. Released in late 2003, the Dimension 2400 was marketed towards small businesses, and boy, does it show. It's not necessarily ugly, it's just there. It sits on the desk with an expression that says, "Let's file some taxes." To its credit, I've always enjoyed Dell's toolless design. The quick release latch at the back gives easy access to the computer organs within. On the front we have two USB ports and the obligatory headphone jack, a floppy drive built right into the fascia, and above that sits the ubiquitous LG Super Multi DVD drive. I'm fairly certain we've all owned this exact drive at some point in our lives. The power button is the only real flair here though, with the LED indicators extending outwards like the antennae of a 1950s sci-fi alien with a round Dell body. Meanwhile, the stickers on the front promise a Pentium 4 experience that is fully equipped for Windows XP. However, turning the machine around gives us our first real clue that something is amiss. We see the standard PS2 ports and USB, but there's also onboard VGA and DVI. Then there's a dedicated sound card. Let's hope it's something half decent. This rear I/O was my first hint that the brains of this machine might not be a Dell at all, but something else entirely. And what is that something else? Well, let's find out. I've got a lot more planned, so if you're enjoying the content, click the like button, leave a comment, and subscribe. It honestly means the world to me. A massive thank you to everybody already subscribed. Now, back to the video. That quick release I mentioned earlier makes this part a breeze. The side panel slides off and immediately I'm greeted by an AMD branded cooling fan and a motherboard that is a far cry from Dell's proprietary green and brown layouts. In fact, it's an Albitron KM51PV AM2. Released in mid-2006, this is quite an upgrade from the original hardware. Sounding more like a villain from the Transformers films than a motherboard, Albitron designed mid-range boards for the tech enthusiasts who wish to upgrade their machines with decent hardware on a budget. Led by a former executive from Gigabyte, Jack Coe in 2002, the company hit the ground running with a clear mission: provide enthusiast-level features without the enthusiast-level price tag. But Albitron wasn't just about value, they were always thinking ahead, which brings us back to this specific board. This was a fascinating piece of kit for 2006. This board was firmly planted in the beginning of the AM2 era, supporting a maximum of 4GB of DDR2 with 4 slots available. What makes this particular board interesting is the chipset. It's using the NVIDIA GeForce 6150 IGP. Now this was never meant for high-end gaming, but it did allow for smooth video playback and you could get away with gaming on some lower settings. The expansion layout on this Albitron is surprisingly robust. We have a dedicated PCI Express 16-speed slot, which meant the owner could drop in a serious GPU and turn this machine into a genuine gaming powerhouse. Flanking that is a single PCIe slot and 2 legacy PCI slots, housing that mystery sound card we spotted earlier. Turning our attention to storage, this board is a bit of a dual citizen. It features 4 SATA 2 ports, offering 3GB a second speeds, but Albitron didn't leave the past behind. We also have 2 IDE channels and a dedicated floppy controller. We have the best of both worlds. Now let's take a closer look at that sound card and see what we actually have. After removing the screw, it pops right out, revealing a Sound Blaster Live 24-bit model SB0410. At first glance, it looks like a standard budget card, but this Sound Blaster packs a revamped 24-bit controller, the CA0106-DAT, with EAX 3.0 support, treating mid-2000 gamers to immersive audio in classics like Doom 3 and Half-Life 2. It isn't exactly a holy grail. Lacking a hardware DSP means your CPU does the heavy lifting, but it remains highly desirable today. Why? Because it delivers rock-solid Windows XP surround sound without the legendary creative driver nightmares. Looking closely at the PCB, I can see a few spots of light corrosion creeping onto the traces and the audio jacks, but I think we got to this one just in time to be able to save it with a little preventative maintenance. But now, the wait is finally over. Let's unlatch this heatsink and see the brains of the machine. Looking at the contact patch, the original thermal paste has reduced to a translucent film. This thing was practically gasping for air. But a quick wipe reveals our prize, an AMD Athlon 64 X2 5200, an excellent CPU. The date code at 0831 places its birth in the 31st week of 2008, meaning this silicon actually turns 18 this year. Back then, this 65nm Brisbane dual core was the sweet spot for builders. Sure, the motherboard could support a top-tier 6400 Plus, but that would be a 125-watt space heater inside this Dell tower. At 65 watts and 2.7 GHz, this 5200 Plus is the Goldilocks CPU for this build. There is, however, one glaring omission inside this case: a hard drive. Now, I'd love to tell you I have a shelf full of high-end period-accurate drives, but the reality is, I'm poor, and my parts bin is looking pretty thin. What I do have is the 120GB Samsung SATA drive from the Dell Latitude D520 I just revived. If you haven't seen that restoration yet, I'd highly recommend checking it out on my channel now. That drive should serve our purposes perfectly today, even if it is a little bit slow. With all that said, it means nothing if the machine does not power on. But before we get to that, I want to give it a quick clean. Externally, the tower is quite dirty, and we know the thermal paste on the CPU and IGP needs to be renewed. And I also have to attend to that Sound Blaster card. Cue the cleaning montage. With the screws removed, the motherboard easily lifted out, but my fingers touched something sticky on the underside. Flipping it over revealed a nasty patch of leaked electrolyte, and a quick glance on the top side confirms my fears: a severely bulging canister. It looks like we didn't escape the infamous capacitor plague after all, and my confidence in this board booting has just plummeted. But still, we've come this far. We're gonna clean up this mess, press on, and see if this Albitron has any life left in it. I apply a small amount of white vinegar to neutralize the corrosion on the Sound Blaster card, scrubbing the crust away with some 99% isopropyl alcohol. After giving the audio jacks a thorough scrubbing as well, the card is looking much nicer indeed. Next, I pop off the heatsink for the onboard NVIDIA graphics, giving both this and the CPU cooler a thorough cleanup. A fresh dab of thermal paste goes on each, and with the heatsink secured back into position, we are officially ready for reassembly. And just like that, this Dell that is not a Dell is looking magnificent. So much so that in honor of its unique Albitron motherboard, this tower will be known from now on as the Dellbitron. But my triumphs were short-lived. As I feared, the motherboard completely failed to boot, refusing to give us any sign of life even with the bare minimum hardware configurations. It's a safe bet those leaking capacitors are the culprits here. But it's not the end for the Dellbitron. I fully intend to recap this board and bring it back to life. I'm sorry to leave you with a failure video today, but really, it's only a failure for now. Thanks for watching the Retro Tech Detective Show, and I'll see you next time.